Hello, this video is going to be for Haitian morticians only. And on that note, today it will not be a normal recap video. We're going to call this the Real Housewives Season 7 Miami Post-Mortem. We are going to dissect the bones of it, the culture, the context, and see what it says about the world and Bravo at large. Now, I should say I can't possibly cover every single nuance and detail of the entire season in one video, and so this will just be hitting kind of the major key points and things that I think were kind of explored at the reunion. But that being said, if there's anything that I do miss that you would like my take on or an opinion, please leave a comment and I will try to answer it either in video form or just reply back to you. I think we should get started because this is a group autopsy. I will lay the body in front of us and I want you guys, the rest of the morticians, I want you to tell me your thoughts. Let's start with the headline that rocked the entire reunion and low-key was the biggest storyline of the season despite it only coming out at the reunion, which is the revelation Julia laid on us, which is that she and Adriana had sex, slept together during that trip to the Hamptons a few seasons back. And the additional revelation that Adriana apparently was holding this over her head ever since, using it to keep her in line. That was the moment that kind of reframed everything that we knew about their relationship and the dissolution of that relationship that we saw this season. I think when Julia said it, it wasn't shocking so much as it was just clarifying. The Adriana, like the energy between the two of them this entire time has been sort of, there's been an implication that something happened between them, not because either of them have like hinted at it so much as it's just been kind of lingering in the air. I mean, they definitely don't have the air of two people who haven't had sex. There's been tension and this weird protectiveness, little flashes of guilt, and I feel like this revelation just kind of put all the puzzle pieces together and made it finally make sense. I'll be blunt, I believe it 100%. To be honest with you, I had assumed that they slept together at one point even before Julia came out with this, and that was, I assumed that Martina was either involved and or knew about it and they had an open relationship, because again, they just did not act like platonic friends. They acted like two women who were in love with each other this entire time, and it was a little creepy but also very sweet. And so again, this was just a piece of information that helped us put other pieces of information together, not so much this like bombshell revelation. Before, you know, Julia had ever said it, it was just kind of implied. You could definitely feel it in the air, and I would say in how Adriana spoke to her, her body language, Julia's body language sort of changed when they were together. I don't think that this was speculative. It was just sort of building on this subtext that we already have. I will say, just contextually, I think that Julia's marriage to Martina has always fascinated me, mostly because although it does seem like a relationship based on mutual respect, it doesn't ever seem like one based on a mutual rhythm. They're in two very different phases of their life. I think that Martina seems really ready to slow down, enjoy privacy, savor this life that she's built for herself, whereas Julia, on the other hand, seems very restless. She seems impulsive, sensual. She seems like somebody who is using this vehicle of Real Housewives of Miami to build a name for herself, which, by the way, is not a bad thing. I actually think it's great when women can use it in that purpose. I think Camille Grammer did that when she first came on, kind of as Kelsey Grammer's wife. It's like a great way to introduce the world to you, who you are, your accomplishments, especially when you have a spouse who may eclipse you. And that being said, I do think the place where they diverge is not necessarily Julia wanting to do the show, but I think that Martina wanted some simple domesticity after a long life of being in the public eye, of notoriety, of that sort of go, 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 whereas Julia, I think, kind of became an empty nester as her girls got older and now is ready to like wow, like be impulsive and be a real housewife and be in the public eye, just as Martina's starting to slow down. I feel like Julia's starting to pick up, and it seems like they're not aligned there. And this is something that has happened on the Real Housewives again and again and again. It makes me think of Karen and Ray Huger, and Ray, who was kind of ready to move to Florida and settle down and just be like, okay, great, these are my golden years and I'm gonna slow down and I'm just gonna enjoy my coffee, smell the roses. Karen had sort of found this new platform with Real Housewives of Potomac, and she was like launching new businesses and ready to go out and be a public figure and host drag shows and it felt like they were getting their wires crossed for a time there as well, because this can just happen, especially when there's an age gap in the relationship. In the older years, you're in very different spaces, right? So if you're 20 years old and you marry a 40-year-old, you guys are both ready to be like, let's travel and let's go see the world and let's do these adventurous things together. Again, Michael Darby and Ashley Darby come to mind. But then as the age gap, as you both get older, I think it becomes more pronounced, because I think that 20 and 40, you guys can want the same things. But then I think 40 and 60, that's kind of a really different age gap. You're in very different places in your life. And then 60 to 80, that's like a world, that's like a chasm's difference. Like if you're 60, you're still pretty young. You're like going to the gym and you can still be working. And like an 80 is like, you are like looking back, there's more behind you than there is in front of you. Like there's a different vibe at 80. Do you know what I mean? And I think that that's just something we see on Real Housewives over and over again. And I think it applies to Julia and Martina. And by the way, again, none of this is said with any judgment. I think that's just who those two people are at this particular moment in their lives. And I think that Julia seems like somebody who maybe thrives on emotional intensity. Maybe that's why she's been in so many relationships, and also maybe that's not what Martina is providing, but maybe what Adriana was. I also think that Martina has been stretching herself to accommodate that sort of spontaneity. I do think that the storyline this season of Julia wanting to adopt those two boys, it seems to me was driven by Julia. And I do believe Julia when she says that Martina has fallen in love with parenthood and the boys. I don't think that that's false. I just think that there needs to be more of an acknowledgement that that was Julia's choice, right? I don't think that had it been left up to Martina alone, they would have adopted any children. I think that Martina, again, would have chosen the path of least resistance and been like, I'm slowing down, which totally fair. Let's see, where does Adriana fall into this equation of these two women that love each other and are married, but are seemingly in two very different places in life? Despite her insistence otherwise, I 110% believe that Adriana was holding this over Julia's head. I think that Adriana genuinely loved Julia, but I also think that Adriana seems like a very broken person. And I also think that it's easier to see the Adriana who would hold it over her head if you've watched Miami from the very beginning. So not just this excellent reboot, but if you've watched Miami from back when it was, on Bravo proper and then went to Peacock, and then if you watch the entire arc of Adriana's journey on the show, I would say that she has always been a bit of a character and maybe not somebody who always makes the most selfless decisions. I think that Adriana genuinely loved Julia, but I also see her as somebody who would absolutely hold this over her head in an effort to keep her from developing any close intimacy with anybody else. I don't think it came from Adriana using it as, I'm going to hold this over her head to make sure she stays in line and to make sure that she always has my back. I don't think she was using it strategically in that way. I think that she genuinely felt Julia is my best friend, mine, and I don't want her getting closer to any of the other women than she is to me, because she's mine and that's my best friend and I love her and I want to keep her close to me. And I think that's how she was using it and holding it over Julia's head. I don't think she was doing it as a strategic move for the show. I think she was doing it to keep Julia as close and as intimate with her as possible. And this was a secret that they could share that would ensure that it wasn't possible for Julia to leave her, right? To abandon her. I also think, at the reunion, Adriana's like, I wasn't holding it over her head. And what I was referencing at the finale party, it wasn't that. But she doesn't reveal what it was that she was referencing. So then that makes me think that the is what she was referencing. That is what she was referencing. It's like, what else would it be? And if you do have an example of what else would it be, cards on the table, like now's the time, because Julia just blew your spot up. So whatever it is, I would throw it out there, because the only way you're going to convince us it wasn't that. So I do think it was that. And she was just being like, no, it wasn't that. And it was. I will say, unpopular opinion, but I don't particularly like either one of them. I think that Julia kind of embodies one of my least favorite archetypes in Housewives history, which is the perpetual victim. Somebody who, she's always been wronged, she's always been misunderstood, she's always suffering in slow motion. And then Adriana, on the other side of that coin, gives kind of a manipulative chaos agent vibe. So she's kind of the friend who will stir the pot and then cry when she's called out and be like, oh, I didn't mean it like that, which we've seen even just this season alone a few times. And that's, again, coming from somebody who's watched Adriana's entire journey from top to bottom, not just the reboot. And I think the sad part of watching their friendship fall apart is that because of their equal but different flaws, you can also understand why their friendship was so profound and why it worked for such a long time. I think Julia really softened Adriana. Those scenes of the two of them together were some of the first times I remember seeing her vulnerable. And then I think Adriana really emboldened Julia, made her more decisive, made her more assertive. And I actually think that for a while they brought out better multi-dimensional sides of one another that made for better watching. I thought they were a good duo in that way. And now it seems that their relationship has gone from symbiotic to self-destructive, and what we're seeing now is just mutual emotional arson. And I do think it's entertaining for now, for sure, but it's also the kind of dynamic that has been destroying franchises left and right across the Housewives universe. I think that friendships combusting under the weight of this performative transparency with all this unresolved resentment has been a toxicity that is just poisoning all the franchises on Bravo right now. And ultimately, I'm not sure where Miami goes from here. This was like quite the bombshell to end the season on. I don't know if they'll both come back. I know that Julia has checked herself into an inpatient treatment center, so I wish her all the best and certainly hope that she gets on a brighter path and that she can recover from whatever she's recovering from. But also I think that, you know, Bravo and the Real Housewives of Miami is probably not the environment to come out of inpatient from. It's like, maybe give it a season. So as of right now, I would say that's probably like a soft launch for Julia not coming back next season. And, you know, the fans have certainly turned against her, so I would also understand it from that perspective. I would say Adriana, I do see coming back. I don't think that there is a version of Adriana that says no to the Real Housewives of Miami. So I guess that's resolved in that, you know, one of them won't come back. But, you know, it'll be interesting to see how this affects Adriana in terms of her being a team player on the show. Like, where does she go from here without her closest ally from the beginning of the reboot? So now we'll talk about part 2, which also involves Julia. Do you guys like my mug? Real Housewives. So yes, part 2, which also involves Julia, is the other central conflict of this season, which was Guerdy versus Julia. So I think if the Julia and Adriana situation was about secrecy and control, then Gertie versus Julia was more about perception and accountability. And I'll start with this. I think Gertie was right. So regarding what initially capped it off, that cruise bullshit, I think she was right about what happened with and on the cruise. I think that she was right that Julia's behavior was inappropriate. And I think she was right to feel disrespected when Julia threw that water in her face. But I also think that this feud is kind of a perfect case study in how editing, optics, the reality show kind of like sphere can all collide. I think that this key event, the cruise argument, what happened on the cruise, what happened after the cruise, what happened via text message in regards to the cruise, it all happened off camera and we never saw it, which means that instead of watching this like breakdown of their friendship, we kind of just watched the wreckage and we were left kind of piecing together what happened from these fragments of confessionals, which is not really the way that any Real Housewives show thrives. I think that's always been dangerous on Housewives. When the inciting incident happens in the dark, off camera. The audience has to, by proxy, become a detective, and then each person's truth hardens into bias, and it gets so split down the middle because there's no evidence for a whole audience of people to kind of form a consensus around. And the two defining moments between Gertie and Julia this season, which were heavily litigated at the reunion, were of course the water toss and then Gertie displaying the private text messages at her party. I think both were very ugly, but carried quite different energies. So I think the water toss was impulsive. I think it was definitely disrespectful, but I also think it was emotionally raw. And the text reveal, on the other hand, was very deliberate and calculated. I think Gertie turned a private wound into a public humiliation ritual, and she forced everyone else in the room to bear witness, and in doing so she turned the audience, not just of the show but the women in the room, the audience of her doing this, into participants in kind of a humiliation ritual that maybe they hadn't signed up to be a part of. That being said, I also understand why she did it, because we need to talk about race and how race can kind of factor into, I mean, all of the franchises, of course, but especially franchises where it's mixed race, right? Where it's some white, some black, you know, some women of color, some non-women of color. I think that this tends to rear its head a little bit more with the latter. Gertie is the only full-time Black housewife on this cast. Her experience within the group is going to be shaped by that, whether the show names it or not. And her tone and her defensiveness and her pain, all of it is going to be filtered through the reality of being a Black woman while navigating a mostly white, wealthy, image conscious space. And by that, I don't just mean her franchise, I mean just Bravo generally. And so when she says that she felt unsupported, I know that she's not just talking about that singular moment, right? She's talking about the pattern, the micro exclusions, the subtle invalidations, all of these things that like kind of build up over time and then come to a head, much in the way that it did this season. And that doesn't mean that she was right about every detail. I mean, they kind of clocked her ass over and over again at the reunion in terms of pulling up the footage. Like every little thing she said was like proven wrong. Her being like, you didn't have my back in the moment. And then they showed all the women telling her off in the moment, or like, I wouldn't do that. And then they showed her running away when somebody else got water tossed in their face, like she didn't care. So it's like, I'm not like defending every little nitpicky thing. Like, I know that she got a lot of details wrong, but I do think that her perception of what happened is informed by something deeper than just what we're seeing on screen. And I also think, you know, to be fair, I think the women did have her back in their own way, and it's just not the way she wanted or expected. I think housewives tend to equate, you know, perceived silence as a betrayal, but I also think that they don't leave enough room for silence to be read as shock, right? I think that at the text party, specifically when everybody was like leaving with Julia, she took that as, oh, well, they're taking Julia's side. They believe Julia. They don't believe me. They hate me. Julia. Whereas I think from an objective outsider perspective, what I took it as is that would emotionally shatter me if that happened between two of my friends. I would also want to leave. I would need a minute to process what had just happened. I would definitely be like, am I supposed to now turn to my friend and like shame her? Like, do you know what I mean? I don't fault the other women for not immediately being like, what the hell, Julia? It's like, first of all, nobody's sitting up here and reading these texts. But also, even if they were, it's like, this is something to parse out in private, where I can think about it, where I can process it, and where I can like form a way to go about this where I honor my values and my feelings, and I'm not put on the spot in front of all these people, if that makes sense. I also think that the group walking out wasn't about race, right? It was about boundaries. It was about them, like I just said, just having a second to be like, whoa, what just happened? But the fact that Gertie's feelings were almost immediately dismissed right after, that's kind of where race quietly re-enters the room. And if I'm being honest, Gertie's refusal to accept apologies combined with her tendency to steamroll everybody in every conversation, like nobody can get a fucking word in edgewise, and it drives me a little batty. It does make her harder to root for at times, but I think it's the paradox of being right and exhausting, right? It's like, I think combined with how women of color can sometimes be treated on Bravo, expected to be strong, but then being punished for it. I don't know how to say, Gertie, you are right. You were right to feel that way. You were right to be like, can somebody pay attention to me and honor my feelings the same way that you're honoring Julia's? But I also need you to slow down and take a breath and receive what some of the other women are saying about, like, we did have your back. We did care. At the table, we said that's not okay. And like, I need her to be in a space to receive that so that they can then receive what she's saying, if that makes sense. It just felt like a lot of crosstalk and nobody listening at the reunion. And that was really frustrating. That being said, though, the other thing that annoyed me is, like, meanwhile, right, Julia, who's the instigator of all of this, who was at fault with the cruise thing, who again played the victim, she came out looking so composed, right? She came out looking composed and victimized. So it like only contributed to empowering Julia to keep on being like, keep on trying it. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, you've just now empowered Julia to keep fucking pulling this shit every single season, because even though you're right, you have now alienated all of the other women by making sure that you punish them before you punish her. And also, I think zooming out, this feud between the two women kind of reflected a bigger problem with Miami as a franchise, and why I think it'll never like blow up to the same proportions of like a Salt Lake City. And that's because these women are not friends. They're not really friends. They're kind of just coworkers playing friends, and you can tell. And you can see it in the lack of emotional continuity between scenes. There are genuinely organic friendships here, but they're like duos. It's like Alexia and Marisol are obviously really friends. And Lisa and Larsa seemed like they were friends. And then the season was like a who gives a fuck? But like, you know, I don't know if Larsa is actually capable of being friends with anyone, but if she were, she would have been friends with Lisa. And Julia and Adriana, they were genuinely friends. But it's like the way that the duos all come together, it feels like strategic alliances and not relationships. And then that's dangerous because the Real Housewives, you know, it's built on friendship as a vehicle to explore interpersonal dynamic conflict. And when the friendships feel hollow, the rest of the show is going to ring hollow. All that's left is going to be spectacle, which leads us to stuff like Gertie reading those texts at the party. This was my critique as a viewer and not as somebody who's just looking at it through an interpersonal lens, is like that moment would have landed harder if I had been given more context to Gertie and Julia's friendship before this moment happened. I kind of forgot they were friends, and then they feuded all season, and I was left wondering what the emotional stakes of that were, because I just frankly didn't even really think of them as friends before this. And so I would like to shift to something, you know, bringing back Dr. Nicole. It was kind of exposing this show's emotional vacuum, because I think Gertie's desperation for a real friend this season wasn't just about Julia. I think it was about a deeper loneliness that she's held since Dr. Nicole left, and realizing that after all these years, she's still sort of an outsider in this cast because she is so different from these other women. And I don't mean even in the inherent like cultural differences. I mean different, like she's just got a totally different personality, outlook on life, right? Like she's like one of the few women who I think is tangibly just very different in how she talks, operates, like, and you can tell. And Dr. Nicole was a kindred spirit, and now she's gone. And so they kind of have to bring her back for Gertie to feel like she has any space to show who she really is, which is a bummer. Let's shift to, while we're on the subject of race, Adriana calling Kiki ratchet. I don't care if she tries to like splice it and dice it at the reunion and be like, no, I was calling her wretched. Like, you said ratchet, we heard you, and you didn't correct it in the moment, so nice try. I mean, let's say hypothetically she did say wretched. Her reaction right afterwards kind of said everything to me. First of all, she went on the after show and defended using the word ratchet. So to change it to wretched after you saw the fan reaction is a little absurd. It seems like it wasn't so much a misunderstanding as it was damage control. And then I think what was the worst part about that to me, because listen, Adriana's fucking crazy, okay? She's always going to be on one, like whatever. It was the silence and the lack of defense for Kiki that really got me. The complete lack of pushback from the other women when Kiki was defending herself was inexcusable to me. And even if Adriana's intent wasn't malicious, the impact was, right? It's not about intent, it's about impact. And the refusal from the group to acknowledge it, and furthermore, the refusal of Andy Cohen to really press that issue, speaks volumes to me, right? About this franchise, where it stands and how race plays into it. And I think this is also a moment to bring up why reunion structure matters. The seating chart, as we all know, is symbolic, and it tells the audience whose story mattered the most that season. And so when Stephanie, who is boring as fuck and contributed absolutely nothing this whole season, was seated in first chair, and they revealed it on Twitter, and Guerdy, who had one of the most significant storylines of the season, was in third, that was a choice. That like sent a message. And honestly, do I think that Gertie would be first chair if she were white? Probably yes, right? And I think it's time for Bravo to involve more women of color in shaping these reunions, not just in casting, but in producing, in deciding the order of questions, in how topics are handled. I think that they need to not just include women of color, but also like examine our unconscious bias for all of the white producers, right? Because I think a white male host like Andy, no matter how seasoned he is, can't fully navigate the nuance of a racialized insult that plays out on one of these shows. And I think that these moments kind of keep getting handled poorly, and it doesn't just fail the women on screen. You didn't just fail Kiki, but also then it fails the viewers who see their own experience reflected there, right? If there's a woman of color who's been called ratchet and she watches this season, she's like, nobody stood up for me either, if that makes sense. And just while we're on the subject, we can talk about Stephanie because she's the newbie and she came in this season. I would say, like, I know I just said why was she first chair, but I would maybe even extend that to why was she there at all. She was just a complete non-entity this season, beautifully dressed, total vacuum. And sometimes it baffles my mind, like why production decided that she was going to be a centerpiece, why she got first chair. This to me is reflective of a growing issue across all of Bravo and all of reality TV, to be honest, which is that producers seem to believe that wealth equates to watchability, which it absolutely does not. In fact, to me, it often does the opposite. I think the best kind of reality TV, especially the kind that lives in cultural memory, is about struggle, humor. It highlights humanity in people. You know, the cast of Vanderpump Rules, which is now seen as one of the greatest reality TV shows of all time, they were broke waiters in shitty apartments where you couldn't run the air conditioner and the microwave at the same time without the power going out, and it's one of the most iconic shows ever made. But also across Housewives, like Bethany Frankel started as middle class and became like Bravo royalty, and Monica Garcia I think is a more recent example of on Salt Lake City, where she gave us one of the best first season arcs of all time before the reality Von T stuff came out. And then the reality Von T stuff was just a fucking like gold mine of incredible TV. And she's middle class also. And so what do all of these people and things have in common? They're real. They are real and they go on reality TV. And the drama is more about stakes, not status, emotional stakes. I think that Stephanie is what happens when you start casting for optics because somebody maybe fits the profile of a Real Housewife. She's rich and beautiful and entirely uninteresting. Her entire storyline this season just seemed to be, I own a private jet. And that was it. I think that I own a private jet is fine if it comes with a dose of self-awareness or humor, even vulnerability underneath it, but there just wasn't. She was just like a showcase piece the whole season, a curated luxury object in a franchise that's starting to confuse wealth with depth. And watching her this season, I just kept thinking, this is not aspirational, this is alienating as a viewer. And at a time when most people are struggling to afford groceries, there's something kind of grotesque about somebody's entire first season storyline being about the rules that they have for their private jet. I find it fatiguing and I don't enjoy watching it. And it's not that housewives can't be wealthy. I just think they have to also feel human if they are going to be insanely wealthy. And, you know, you don't need to be relatable all the time. You don't need to be like, I'm going down to Target. It's like, but we do need reality, right? Like, what's actually going on with you? Why should I care about you? Why should I invest in you emotionally? And she just didn't give me a reason to. So overall, I would say season 7 was strong, but it was very scattered. It had real highs, very meaningful lows. I think overall it lacked cohesion. It felt like multiple shows were kind of stitched together. I think the storytelling needs a little bit more focus, and the friendship of the women needs a little bit more grounding. One bright spot I thought for me was Alexia's storyline. I think her finally leaving Todd with Marisol cheering her on and being like, thank you, God. It was personal and vulnerable and rooted in something real. And watching two women who have known each other for decades navigate something so deeply human, it reminded me why this show works when it does work. For all of its flaws, Miami still does deliver in ways that other franchises don't. It's very stylish and dramatic and beautifully shot and filled with women who, for better or for worse, clock the fuck in. Like, nobody is phoning it in on Miami. The friends of feel like full-time housewives because they are all so connected, locked in, and show up every single time, which can't be said for all the other franchises. There are so many friends of that come and go that you're like, wait, who are you? Everybody on Miami has a place. Everybody is showing up 110%. For season 8, I really want to see some growth. I want to see Gertie be given the narrative weight that I think she's earned. And I also want to see accountability between these women handled with a little bit more grace and thoughtfulness. I would like to see these friendship arcs evolve a little bit more naturally and not just because production needs new alliances. And I would also say, keep up the authenticity, because the key to Miami continuing to grow is just protecting that. But yeah, that is sort of my full breakdown of the Real Housewives of Miami season 7. So, it was a season of secrets and spectacle and reckoning and blah, 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 blah. I would say that overall, I was happy, and I'm looking forward to season 8. But what did you guys all think? I'm very curious, like, if there's anything I missed that we want to talk about, like, I want to know. I want to know what you guys think of Julia versus Adriana. I want to know what you guys think of Julia versus Guerdy. I want to know if you think Julia's going to come back next season. I kind of don't think she is. I also want to know, like, what you think about how race plays into the show, and also how it plays into other Bravo shows. I'd also like to know your thoughts on the newbie Stephanie, and, like, do you think she was a good addition? And also, more than that, do you think that rich people are ruining Bravo? Because I kind of do. To quote the incredible Stassi Schroeder, I hate rich people, they annoy me. And yeah, if you like this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell. Definitely going to be more videos coming your way soon, so thank you so much for watching. Until then, I'll be here polishing bodies, polishing tombstones, my fellow Haitian morticians. So thank you for joining me for this autopsy, and I will see you again very soon.